Welcome to our Tuesday webinar. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. I'm joined by Susie Carello, Executive Director of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSED, Angeli Matos, Executive Director, Policy and Operations at New York City Department of Education, Aaron Cochran, Managing Director in the same office, Laurie Hazeley, Senior Director, Charter Authorizing and Accountability at New York City DOE. And we'll be joined shortly by Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center. Today we'll follow our usual format. I'll share a few updates. We'll hear from updates from David, Susie, and Laurie, and field some outstanding questions from last week, and then take questions from the Q&A before turning to New York City DOE for questions. Beginning next week, we'll be back to our regular schedule of weekly Tuesday webinars and subject-specific webinars on Thursdays. Next Thursday, July 30th, we'll focus on HR human resources-related questions in the current context, featuring Amy Bess, partner and shareholder at Vetter Price. If you have outstanding human resources-related questions you'd like to see addressed, please feel free to send them to me. Then on August 8th, we will have our rescheduled Race, Justice, and Equity conversation series with charter school educators. We have two national updates. Congressional leaders are expected to begin negotiations on another emergency aid package in the coming days, with a shared goal of signing something into law within 3 weeks. There's a strong likelihood that the package will continue to will include funds for K through 12 education, although the format that their distribution will take is still not known. As a reminder, these funds will be critical as part of the governor's decision about any potential cuts to school aid funding in New York. Will tack directly back to how much aid comes from the federal government. In addition, the CDC is planning to release additional school reopening guidance next week. We'll let you know when it's released and if it has any implications or resources for your planning. Now, before we hear from our panel, a little housekeeping. Please use the Q&A feature for your questions. When you enter your questions in the chat, only the presenters will see it. So please use the Q&A. The Q&A is much easier for us to track unanswered questions and make sure we follow up offline if need be. And then finally, we may not be able to get to all your questions today. If you have a question that isn't answered today and it is important for your work as you work on your plan before next Tuesday, please reach out. Okay, with all that said, Susie, Laurie, David, welcome. Thank you as always for joining us. We'll start with any updates you have to share. David, we're going to start with you because one thing folks are probably most interested in to hear more about first is the memo released related to the CARES funding, which was released by SED yesterday.
Absolutely, and it's good to see everyone. I hope you are all doing well. I know that you are knee-deep in reopening plan funding. I have a number of updates, but I'll take the ESER update first. As you saw, the State Education Department released ESER guidelines. We were waiting on clarity from the federal government, and the information you received should have included a memo as well as a spreadsheet that outlines how much funding your school will receive in ESER funding. That funding is based on your title application, and unlike traditional district schools, the funding that is in the spreadsheet does not need to be, you do not need to consult the non-public schools regarding those funds. So traditional district schools are working with the non-public schools, and their funding might be released or encumbered for state aid purposes. But your funding in the spreadsheet is the funding that we anticipate you'll receive. However, there is a next step that you need to take, and this is very important. If you do nothing, you will not receive these funds. So your school needs to submit a single CARES Act combined funding application using the SED monitoring and vendor reporting system. And I will send an email out to the charter school listserv reiterating that and giving you a link to that platform. If you're not on the charter school listserv, I would say shame on you for not updating your SEDREF account, but reach out to me at david.frank@nysed.gov and I'll send you the information. Those applications are due by August 15th of this year. So you need to fill out that information in that portal by August 15th. However, if you need an extension, you can request one. And you can request one following the instructions in the memo. And I'll include that information in the email I send out. You don't ask me for an extension, but rather you would ask the title office. And so I will send out that information. But please don't leave that money on the table. Make sure that your school is submitting that application, whether you're a board member or an executive director or some other position. Please make sure that money isn't left on the table. We also are following the Regents' adoption of updated regulations at last week's Board of Regents meeting. We will, in partnership with SUNY and the New York City Department of Education, release ESSA fiscal transparency guidance. This is draft guidance that's for public comment. We'll leave it out for public comment for about 2 weeks. And I will also send information on that I'll send information on that through the charter school listserv as well. And so again, that reiterates why you should make sure that your SEDREF information is up to date. And later on, I'll include a link to guidance on how to update your SEDREF, check and update your SEDREF information. Also, as you saw, the State Education Department issued reopening guidance, and plans are due both to the Department of Health as well as the applicable entity that they're due to on the 31st of July. So not only do you have the ESER application and looking over the ESSA fiscal transparency guidance, but which will, that information, the ESSA fiscal transparency information, of course, is not due until November. But then we also have the annual report, which is due on August 3rd, and that's for all charter schools. So make sure that you are that you've completed the annual report through the SED portal on August 3rd, and that was also information sent out via the charter school listserv. And again, just to reiterate, the fiscal information is not due until November 2nd, not the 1st, that's a weekend. And lastly, for Board of Regents authorized charter schools, renewal applications are due August 14th, with the benchmark 1 narrative due October 14th. And then very last but not least, SED through my office is sending out an LFAQ for charter schools in partnership with our Office of Bilingual Ed and World Languages. And we should also be doing that later this week. So there's a lot of stuff going on. ESER application, ESSA fiscal transparency guidance, reopening guidance, annual report, renewal applications, and the LFAQ. I would be happy to answer any questions. I know that's a lot of information, but I will email all of you regarding it.
All right, great. Thanks, David. I just want to add that we have put on our website a workbook to help schools find funding differences resulting from the decrease in core aid, which can be used in their CARES funding application. We'll put that link in the chat just to add that. You can find that resource on our website. Thank you, David. I'm sure schools will be looking forward to that email with that all that good information. Susie, welcome. How are you? And do you have an update that you'd like to share?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Yamika. Yet again, good to be here with all of you. We put out a document last week that did not play nicely with our website and have been trying to rejigger it and get it up. So you'll notice on our website, we pulled that down, have put in a link to the plan from New York Forward, the New York State Department of Health, because that information, of course, is due to them through their portal, which is at that link on July 31st. In the intervening time, actually, as we're trying to rejigger to get the information that we want from our schools up, remains the same. Little news, just a little description of any pre-opening plans, a school calendar, scheduling for students, scheduling for staff, enrollment and attendance, any changes to your academic program, and if you have documents that you've already created that explain those things either to families or staff, the opportunity to just send us those documents so that you're not writing more things for us. And David's list of everything that is coming at you makes me feel good about the following. We're going to put off the elements that SUNY asked for until August 14th. If you get them done ahead of time, we're getting Epicenter set up. It's not quite there yet, but if you want to send it before August 14th, great. If you don't get to it until August 14th, that's fine. The upside, I think, is it allows us and you, the SUNY authorized schools, to focus on ensuring that by July 31st, you get the plans that the New York State Department of Health is requiring. So that's that's kind of my big thing to share today. We're going to give you a little bit more breathing room to provide the information that was SUNY only related. And we'll either email that out to you directly because we seem to be having a hard time, or we'll be starting from scratch. And of course, all of you are welcome to call me at any time if there's any concerns or questions that arise. The other thing I just want to share is that with regard to renewal, you'll be hearing from the from the SUNY renewal teams. For those of you that have schools that are up for renewal, there will be a Zoom gathering for all of the schools that are up for renewal this year. There's not an exact date yet, but I think they're kind of targeting the first week in August, so that we'll have a little bit of a smaller forum to ask really specific questions, as well as then that's the time frame for when kind of scheduling and other pieces, if there are concerns with that. My hunch is there will be some unknowns about that, but we know that we're going to be able to, whether it's remote or blended, do a really good job at getting everyone through the renewal process this year. So that's my update.
All right, great, thank you. Hi, Laurie, would you like to share an update?
Sure. Also, just briefly, I know DOE authorized charter schools that are going through renewal. I am working on documents to send out to you. If you have questions now, feel free to send them to me now. Those will be helpful as I do this planning work, but please know it is forthcoming, and that's all I have right now.
All right, great. Thanks for those updates. Now we'll turn to the questions. We continue to receive questions about what flexibility charters have to determine whether they will be in-person, fully virtual, or hybrid. Just to confirm our understanding, as long as a region has met the governor's requirements for in-person instruction, charters can choose their format. Is that correct? For $100? No. So, David,
health guidance as well as SED's guidance state that the LEA or the charter school can determine which modality of instruction they are providing, whether that is fully remote, fully in person, or a hybrid of the two. However, be warned that if your school decides to go fully in person, there are a whole host of issues that might prevent you from doing that either in whole or in part. For example, the number of cases might increase, and then the governor may or may not order all schools to be closed again. Your school might have a staff member or student, unfortunately, who tests positive for COVID. There might not be transportation available. So there's a whole host of things to think about. However, it is your choice which option you are choosing. Of our schools, the Board of Regents authorized charter schools, we would ask, even if you're choosing to go fully in person, that you do have a contingency plan, particularly for parents who might not want to choose between their child's health, whether real or perceived, and so if students don't want to go to school, we don't want our schools to penalize students and parents for making that choice. I think that throws a wrinkle in things, but that's what it is.
Okay, thank you. Before I move on to the next question, it's going to be related to something you said just now. I just want to open up to Susie and Laurie to see if there's anything they want to add.
No, I echo what David said.
Okay, perfect. All right, so just following up on that, if there's a related question, if a charter decides to be in person to any degree and a family opts out to remain remote, is a charter obligated to provide remote resources in order for that student to continue to be considered to be enrolled and to be able to bill for that student?
I've said this, I think it was last week, but you know, this might sound harsh, but I wouldn't want to be associated with any school that would that I think would unfairly penalize students for parents for being concerned about the health of their children. And so in the strongest possible terms, I would encourage schools to make contingency plans for students and families who might not feel comfortable sending their children for in-person instruction. Also keep in mind, particularly in New York City, that families sometimes are traveling an hour or more on public transportation to get to your schools. And so there's other extenuating factors that might be at play. In addition, enrollment is, across the sector, enrollment is tight. It's difficult this academic year, and not just for charter schools, but for all schools. I believe that why would a charter school make a decision that would perhaps go against the school's economic interests as well by excluding students unnecessarily? So those are just some things to think about. But ultimately, I would say it is within a school's right to choose the modality of instruction for the fall, whether that's in person, remote, or a combination of the two.
Okay, great. And again, before I move on, I want to make sure, Susie and Laurie, if you have anything to add, I want to give you the opportunity to do
that. I would just underscore the guidance that came out from New York Health and the information that you are providing to them in terms of space, mask wearing, etc. I think there was some very thoughtful information in there. And it's going to be a tough year full of choices that may then, just to underscore again, that may then change. If there's one thing I suppose we will come out of this with is some comfort level with change. And so Anna's shaking her head, but to think through.
We might have to accept it, but we don't have to have a new comfort level with it. How about that?
I have faith in us. So I would just, echo David's words and say, to the extent that you can have options for high quality synchronistic instruction for kids this year, those options are going to be super important.
Okay, great. Laurie, you're shaking your head.
And Mika, if I could, well, Laurie should jump in, but I would just say, to underscore something that David and Susie have both alluded to today and previously, if you are not serving a child, even if their parent is asking for the sun and the moon, you are not billing for that child. And that might not be something that David and Susie and Laurie are able to say, but let us as the association be really clear that that is the unfortunate fact and necessity of flexibility. And so if families are expressing a comfort level with something that you feel like you can't accommodate, you should make that transparent to them and remove them from your roster for billing.
No, I agree with all of that.
All right, great, solid advice. We're going to stick with one more in-person question about our question related to in-person attendance. If a student or family refuses to comply with the requirements for in-person attendance, for example, wearing masks, submitting temperature checks, etc., can a school mandate that a student participate in remote construction? And then add on to that, if a student either opts for or is required to participate in remote instruction, are there any billing implications?
That's a very tough question. the governor's office has put out guidelines for the use of masks in public spaces, of which a school is one. And so there's guidance that supports requiring masks for all students. However, especially for our youngest students or our most vulnerable students, students with disabilities, for example, wearing a mask might not be feasible or might pose logistical challenges or developmental challenges. And so schools should be sure to have alternative options for those students, whether they're in distance, there's larger distances between students, there's separate spaces for those students within the applicable requirements of IDEA. Those are things that your school needs to consider. And I just don't have an answer for that definitively. It's something that we can continue to look into. It will be a very tough situation, and a situation I'm sure that will come up in many schools. But it's something that we can all research and help provide support and guidance. But I think we would want our schools to tackle those situations with the grace and humility that you have tackled the entire pandemic, and use your creativity and innovation to help address that very unfortunate situation.
Okay, thank you. And I want to make sure again, Laurie and Susie. Okay, we're going to move on. I see the heads nodding already. All right. So next question. As schools are preparing their plans, how should they be thinking about things that may otherwise require a revision to their charter? I will open that up to everyone. And Susie, I'm gonna point to you first. I think you might have mentioned something on a previous webinar about this. I think you had some good advice here.
So with regard to charter revisions, right? The Institute has, we've talked about this long and hard since March. And given all of the options associated this year and the plans that you are presenting, we've kind of determined that there is a blanket opportunity this year that that is not necessary. For the year, that the plans that you put in and the information that we're asking for would constitute what would be in place for this year. And if there are things that we learn and we learn how to do them really well for the future, then we would process permanent charter revisions at some point after next year. Did I get everything in your question, Yamika?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
David, Laurie, do you want to add?
I think Susie is spot on.
Yeah,
Very good.
agreed.
Very good. Next question. There's been some questions about the requirement for schools to have a point of contact with the Department of Health. Can you just clarify what is your understanding of that requirement?
That's someone who, that's from the SED guidance, and that would be someone in your school who is responsible for reaching out to the Department of Health, is responsible for monitoring Department of Health guidance. It doesn't have to be a formal job description. It can be, that's just someone's responsibility, just like you have a McKinney-Vento coordinator or liaison, which all of your schools should have, by the way. But I would say it's more of a informal position. We know that some Department of Health's, because of everyone's been swamped, maybe they have been more responsive or less responsive, but it's just a position. If there's, if someone in your school has a question, or if SED or the Department of Health needs to reach out to someone, that would be the person. And that's why we're asking schools to identify that person.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is regarding students with disabilities and students who are English language learners. Is it possible to offer students more time in school than their general education peers? And then additionally, follow-on question is, the guidance says that students with disabilities should attend in person as much as possible. Will integrated co-taught classrooms need to be in compliance with the typical ratio of general education students. So whoever wants to jump in.
Not only do I think it's okay to provide additional learning opportunities for vulnerable students, I would encourage schools to do so. Regarding in-person instruction, that's something that the schools should continue to work with their committees on special education regarding prior to the commencement of the 2021 school year. And then schools should, to the best of their ability, follow the services outlined on the student's IEP once the 2021 school year commences. But keep in mind, regarding in-person instruction, other than that's mandated through the CSE for students with disabilities, Governor Cuomo will be is scheduled to, I should say, make an announcement regarding in-person instruction the first week of August, by August 7th. And so it would be premature to talk about any other specifics until that point.
All right, great, thank you. I see, Susie, you're nodding your head. Laurie, you too. I'm assuming you fully agree and there's nothing to add. Oh, you do want to add. Go ahead, Susie.
I would just say, I mean, one of the things that we've seen a few really interesting, I think, school designs, if there is a blended learning scenario where some students in cohorts are there for the first couple of days or 2.5 days, and other students are there for the other 2.5 days, where students with disabilities are there for a portion of each of those days. I think, honestly, the draft plans or the things that you all have called and said, what do you think about this? Have come up with some really interesting, different ways to schedule the work so that students with disabilities, English language learners, some of the vulnerable academic students that we know we need to really do a super job of serving, as with all kids. But you guys have had some really great and different schedules that you're sharing, and I'm going to just throw this out there that I don't know if this will be the format, but it may be that once we start seeing those as we get a little closer to the school year and understand what's going to be possible, it would be really super to have a compendium of those things across all of the schools, so we could look at what other people are designing and putting in place, and maybe if someone has to adjust, that'll give them some good ideas.
All right, great, thank you. Right, we're going to move quickly to the last two questions before we turn to the Q&A, so we can stay on schedule and make sure we get to all parts of our webinar today. Can you please summarize as quickly and briefly as you can, and still do, obviously, a good job answering a question, the current instructional hours and instructional days requirements, and any advice you would give schools on how to plan for those instructional hours and days? And the second question really is just probably for David, for SED. The Child Nutrition SED website has waivers posted for the summer. Do you know when the waivers for 2020-21 school year will be available to schools? And with that, I'm going to leave this to all of you to answer. Susie, we'll start with you, and then we'll just make it around what I see. Susie, David, Laurie. Thank you.
I'm going to ask David or Laurie to go first. Sorry.
Sure. So regarding instructional hours, I assume the question, or could you just clarify, Yomika, do you mean for this 2021 academic year?
Yes.
Yeah, so right now, the instructional hour requirement is the same 900 or 990 hours, depending on the grade levels you offer, over 180 days. SED will be coming out with additional flexibilities if necessary in conjunction with the executive, but schools should plan for providing that amount of instructional time until we hear otherwise. However, SED and the Board of Regents also passed regulations over the past few months that would allow some flexibility within that time frame. For example, students working on independent projects, students working with their peers, working in small groups, engaged in other learning activities will count towards that 900 hours, 990 hours. I would point people to the Board of Regents regulations that were passed just last week regarding that. And if there's any questions regarding instructional hours, I would recommend that schools reach out to their authorizer, whether it's SUNY, SED, or DOE, or Buffalo. And what was there another part of the question, Yumika? My apologies.
Part of the question was for you for Children Nutrition SED website, the waivers. Do you know if the waivers for 2021 school year will be available to schools, when that will be? Right now,
I will find that out. I don't know that.
Thank you. And Susie, Laurie, before we turn it over to the Q&A, do you want to provide any additional information?
I'm not sure. Crystal, I'm asked a follow-up question, and I think it was related. Can you guys help me make sure I understand this? If it was related to any material changes to the charter, including enrollment?
Yeah, Susie, that's perfect, because that was actually of the couple of questions we were going to hit before. I wanted to make sure we get to New York City content. I think really drilling down onto the answers around changes to charters. And so there were two clarifying questions. And sorry, I'm just trying to find them in the Q&A. One was from
Crystal's telling me I'm right. So you look for the other question,
yeah.
And I'll start on this one. Thanks, Crystal. So yeah, we anticipate that this year there are a lot of variabilities that might happen, including to things like enrollment, right? It may be that enrollment goes outside of that 20% collar. Our plan right now is, again, we're going to kind of ask in August where you think you stand. But then we'll look at quarterly budgets to make a determination about where you are in terms of your enrollment. Early and often we'll probably talk to folks that we think are running closer to their margins than anybody would have anticipated if that happens, because we think students are coming back, right? But until school opens, whether that's virtually or blended or both, we won't have the exact numbers. So our plan for the year is that we're not going to make charter revisions. Sorry, this happens to me all the time. That we're not going to make, it's one of you calling me. There's someone missing from the webinar. But what we're going to do is, again,
tell them to get on the webinar.
I know, use the budgets for the enrollments. But then if there are other changes, we anticipate it's going to be fluid this year as it was from March to June. And so to make those as permanent material changes to your charter, if we're kind of back on regular footing 2 years from now, is, a bureaucratic game we can play with you, but we try not to do that. Sometimes we fail, but we try not to do that. So anything that you put either in your plans that are going to the DOH for the governor's office or in with us, that's what we want to have. Now, if you end up enrolling 300 more students, you should let us know. So I will say that the big underscore on that is we're going to continue to have a year where we should have lots of conversation when things are changing if we're unsure about them. But no, we're going to try to avoid processing hundreds of charter changes only to change them back. I love when I get a super helpful.
I found the second question, which I'll pose to everyone, and also in that same breath ask David and Laurie to amend, expand, or approve Susie's answer, which is also that then any plan that overrides minutes in a charter is not a material change, and whatever a school submits in their plan reflecting their programming to you all would be sufficient and not require a material change. Although potentially, Susie, what I'm hearing from you is like, that's in a realm of reasonableness. And if you're like doubling or halving your minutes, that warrants a conversation. Susie, David, Laurie, that as well as Susie's earlier question in terms of the enrollment piece in particular.
Yeah, so I would say for the Department of Education as authorizer would likely not be accepting any revisions upwards. In terms of revisions downward, echoing what Susie said, if this is just because of what we are in right now, we also would not be interested in processing revisions if this is temporary. But we again would reassess it looking forward at next school year, and I mean 21, 22 and beyond, we would reassess then. In terms of where I would say material revisions, so if you have a key design element in your school, right, which is a major reason. So for example, I'll take an extreme example where you have a bilingual program and parents likely came to your school because of the bilingual program. And I would expect that schools would continue that through their reopening plans, right? And so if their reopening plans don't reflect a key design element of your school, then I would want to have a further conversation about that.
I wholeheartedly associate myself with my colleagues' remarks.
Great, so you guys appear on my screen like this, so we'll do like this. I don't know if anyone is the same Z's sign use. All right, so last technical question, because I see that David, you answered it, but I think it's worth asking aloud. And for folks who've asked questions in the Q&A that aren't answered, I'll reiterate, we are we, the association, are capturing them, sharing them out with the authorizers as well as the Charter Center, tracking them, recycling them. Did I just lose you guys? Can you?
You're frozen.
I can see you. Up.
Oh.
Oh, there you
Right.
are.
You're back, Anna.
Of course, I was worried about my internet, and this is the moment. Of course, this is the moment. So I'm prioritizing questions that, in my limited and imperfect interpretation, you need an answer to in order to complete plans by July 31st. All of the other questions are hugely important, and we will get to them. They likely don't have answers now, so things like people are asking about regions and things like that, we are tracking them. We will be sure to continue to track those and raise them in future webinars. So last question before I hand it over to our friends in New York City. You are creating, as you are actually crafting the actual document that is your plan, can you incorporate by reference the requirements of something like the SCD requirements or the DOH requirements, such that your plan is an actually readable document for your most important stakeholders, which are your students and families and community, or do really numbers in terms of making sure that you stick to every sort of line and sub-bullet of things like the DOH and SCD guidelines?
Hi, Anna.
Yeah, so that was Steve Fowler-Riff's question, and I'll say what I told him. That's something. So the question was, can schools incorporate by reference DOH and SED and SUNY guidelines, or do they have to write everything out, or can they say, pursuant to paragraph 4 of the DOH guidance, that's what we're going to do? And I said to Steve that that's something that you should talk to your authorizer about. I didn't see any reason why SED, why we wouldn't allow it, but you should talk to your authorizer. But like many things, so for example, I'll use discipline policies as a good analogy. Oftentimes we'll get a discipline policy from a school and it'll say, we're going to follow this law, or we're going to follow the New York City DOE's discipline policy, which is legal. You can do that. But when one changes, or when someone reads the document and they don't know what that means or what that refers to, then you're in big trouble. So you might want to consider even if you're cutting and pasting from the different documents, doing that, rather than just saying, see page 4 of the SED guidance, we're gonna do that. It just makes it more readable. Remember, you're posting these documents on your charter school's website. And so it's not just for us bureaucrats sitting in Albany or in Brooklyn in Laurie's case, but it's for your communities, it's for your parents, it's for your teachers, it's even for your students. So be mindful of that as you're creating the documents.
I'll just add on that for the specific pieces that are coming for us, not for the DOH, if you do have other materials that you have created to describe schedules for students and staff and others, you may link those, add as an attachment, and reference those for the SUNY related materials.
Yeah, I would just wholeheartedly agree. And you know, these should be family facing documents, family friendly, community friendly documents. So just, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excellent, and thanks everyone for bearing with my spotty internet. Corey, Anjali, handing the torch over to you all and your hopefully better internet.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see some of you again. We had a bunch of questions to go through. I think it has already been answered, I think, by the chat that DOE calendar is still not out, as we know. I think the question, Anjali, maybe to start with, though, is last week, Carranzo announced that DOE is still opening September 10th. Is that confirmed, for meaning that charters will be able to get into their buildings, I guess would be the first question, with students that day. And then the follow-up is there any updates or movement on schools trying to open earlier than September 10th in the DOE, if they're co-located in DOE space?
Hey everyone, this is Erin. I am subbing for Anjali this afternoon. Happy to be with you today. So these are really great questions and we are continuing to look into them, but we do not have any updates at this time.
Okay. We are getting a lot of questions about the facility office hours, Erin. Are those happening tomorrow, and how can schools access them?
Yes, so the first one is tomorrow, and apologies, I'm having slow internet, so I'm going to try and multitask. But I'm going to pop the facilities link in the chat. There we go. All right, I'm in the chat. So this is the link to the facilities office hour. And it is at 11 a.m. Wednesdays.
Got it.
And we're also going to share this in the C Weekly. Oh, I sent that to all panelists. Just kidding. Oh, the link is not working. Okay, let me troubleshoot this.
Okay.
Sorry, folks. So there, yeah. So folks should have a link.
Tonight. Okay, tonight or tomorrow morning, so they can get into these office hours.
So it was sent last week, but yeah, we can see about following up with that.
Okay, great. Schools are wondering, we know last week SED shared a memo with you guys regarding reconciliation. Do you have updates of when the portal will open?
Let's see. I believe we're still confirming that, but I think we're planning to share this week.
Okay. We are getting questions from a lot of folks around the CSE and procedures for the fall. Can you confirm if schools will be able to use remote related services again in the fall?
So right now we are anticipating that a lot of the same practices that we saw in the spring will continue, including virtual IEPs, including teletherapy. So we're still working on the details and determining if there will be any modifications to the services that are being provided remotely. But right now, I think that folks can expect to experience at least some of those services remotely.
Okay. Also, last week, schools heard the mayor mention that there was going to be 100,000 daycare seats available to help families who were not able to have their kids in full-time school, as most if not all schools are entering into some hybrid model this fall. Do you know if those seats will be open to charter school students?
So no update on this question, but we are continuing to look into it.
I'll hit a couple others that I'm assuming you're going to say they're update, but busing, any updates on busing? We can just do all of these.
I know, no updates here. We are continuing to encourage all charter schools that have historically used busing to develop contingency plans in the event that there is no busing or there is late busing. So for instance, it does not start in time for the beginning of school, but no updates there.
Okay. I did want to just add, though, I thought I saw something in Charter Weekly. If you were a new site or you had moved a site, there actually is some information that schools need to submit to OPT.
Yes, good question. And real quick, one clarification. The dates for the reconciliation portal have been announced. Very exciting update from me. So the portal is already open. It opened yesterday and it is due August 14th. So apologies for that. And glad to share those dates. So for, yes, so for any charter that is brand new opening next year, or that any charter that is opening in a new building. So this would include if you are splitting, if you are moving, if there is some door that students are entering that previously they did not enter. We have reached out to all of the charters that were on our radar as potentially being in this boat, but we need any charter that has not already shared a potential new site to reach out to us and to OPT to request service immediately, even if you don't have a signed lease, even if you don't have a certificate of occupancy, if it's just an idea in the air. And that is because in the event that we do get busing and in the event that it is available for the first day of school, we need schools to have already applied for Metro cards and busing. This is also related to Metro cards, which we are planning to provide, so that we have enough time to prepare all of those services and get them to you for the first day of school in September. So yes, if you are planning to move into a site and you have not notified us, you have not talked about a lease with us or certificate of occupancy, you've not already been in touch with Office of Pupil Transportation, even if it is not 100% confirmed, please do so immediately.
Great. And I did want to follow up, when will Metro cards be distributed?
So we are still working on the timelines for that.
David Noah had a good follow-up question that I'm going to ask you about the opening dates of when schools could potentially open charters in co-located space. We understand there's no answer now. Do you have a timeline for when DOE will get out that information to schools?
My understanding is it will be in the next couple weeks, but again, we will share more as we have it.
And then last is, there's always updates on nursing. In particular, one of the schools writes that they've had a hard time getting responses from their Department of Health nursing supervisor. So do you have any information about who schools should be contacting if they're trying to reach out to their DOH nurse's office, how that will be functioning, in addition to just any kind of general updates? I think here, there are some schools that have worked with nurses for a very long time, and the same nurses come every year, and then there are other schools that might not have that same relationship with their nurse.
Sure. Folks, I mean, I think this is in general, but folks, if you're having any issues getting in touch with folks, definitely loop us in at charter schools at schools.nyc.gov, and we can escalate from there.
And then I guess no updates on nurse availability and how they will be distributed in the fall.
No updates. We are continuing to work with that team to determine the demand for nurses and the availability for nurses. As we mentioned before, our hope is that we are able to assign nurses to all schools. Unfortunately, we do have a nurse shortage across the city, so we're going to share more information as we get updates. At this point, nothing can be confirmed.
One of the clarifications that's coming through on the busing, if there is no busing, will those families receive Metro cards?
That is a good question, and that is something that is being explored in the potential alternative transportation ways that we're thinking about maybe helping to get students to school, but no concrete plans yet.
Got it. And I think this goes without saying, but just to be clear, when you say there's a busing issue for all students, you're also referring to students who have busing on their IEP. Is that correct?
Correct. At this point, we are referring to all busing.
All right. And then I think just generally, you know, schools have been interested in guidance from the Department of Health, particularly because a lot of the state guidance refers to the liaisoning with the local health department about certain procedures. I was just curious if you could give an update. I know this is something you were working on. David just put in one example. The quarantining guidelines, procedures for schools with confirmed cases are just some of the elements that I think we're waiting on the Department of Health. Do you have any updates of when schools can anticipate getting that information from the Department of Health?
So we are planning to host a session with the Department of Health on Friday at 11 o'clock. Let's see, no, just kidding. Friday at 3, sorry, mixing up my meeting. So Friday at 3, we are planning to have a sector-wide call with the Department of Health. We will send out the Microsoft Teams meeting link, and it will also be shared in the C Weekly on this Thursday. So again, that's Friday at 3 o'clock, conversation with Department of Health. And we will be able to discuss your concerns related to all of these different health guidance that is coming out. I am trying to figure out how to get this link to show up in the chat.
This is the link for tomorrow.
So I'm trying to work on both the one for tomorrow and the one for Friday. And technology is not my friend right now.
Okay. All right.
If you need to, Anjali, just text or email it to me and I'll do it while you guys keep rolling.
Oh, okay, I can do that. There we go. Fabulous, thank you.
I was just gonna say that I think we have gotten through the questions in the chat. I know there's a lot of Q&A, but I think most of the answers have either come through as there's not guidance yet, and lots of folks wanting the timeline on when nursing guidance will come out, but I think that is what you're going to say you still don't have, Erin, am I correct?
Correct.
Yep, okay. Any other updates that you're able to provide right now for schools?
I think those are the big ticket items, so no, nothing else from our end.
Got it. All right, I will turn it back to you, Yumika.
All right, great, thank you.
And Yumika, just really quickly before we wrap, I just want to say to folks, lots of us, David, myself, Susie, Laurie, Corey, Anjali have been answering questions in the Q&A that have been typed. If you asked a question and you didn't see the answer didn't answer what you were asking, please reach out to us offline so that we can make sure that we tee it up in advance for next week, because we will use the questions that we have listed right now in the Q&A that were not answered in any format to lead off next Tuesday.
Great. Before we wrap, I just want to ask a question of you, Anna. What's the leash for?
Well, if I had it right here, I would share a little piece of joy with everyone, but how about I promise to lead off on Tuesday with it. The Hall family got a new puppy.
All right. So well, I was hoping to see
we needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's running around with my other little puppies right now, my human puppies. We needed something to remember 2020 by that wasn't everything else. So far,
all right.
So good.
Good. So we'll hold you to that for next time. And we hope to see everyone next time, which will be next Tuesday for our regular Tuesday webinar at 4 p.m. Just a reminder, we will go back to our regular schedule of Tuesdays and Thursday webinars, and July 30th we will have the Human Resources Deep Dive webinar, and we'll be back on August 6th for the Race Justice Equity Series. In the meantime, as Anna said, send us your questions. Look for all the emails. There's a lot of follow-up information coming from our presenters today. Have a very good weekend. We'll see you Tuesday. Thank you.